Let me give you some data. We're going to look at the scientific and practical facts. I'm an MD. I practice in Houston, Texas. I specialize in clinical immunotoxicology, how toxins affect the human body, and in particular, how toxins affect the immune system. So a lot of patients I see have been affected by chemicals or vaccines or contaminated indoor environments. We see patients who have seen 20, 30, 40 doctors. Our record is 36 doctors in 18 months. They come in with a shopping bag full of prescription medication they've tried, or that they're taking half of these medications, or they'll bring in a shopping bag full of blue-green algae and shark cartilage enemas and you name it. You know, I've seen it all. And these people are taking all these other things because they tried the pills and everything and it didn't work. So now they're trying anything else to try and make it work. So let's talk about how it was a long time ago. In the 1950s, government figures show that 75% of the air we breathed was outdoor air. Why? Because if a family had a car, it was one car. And it was Dad's car to go to work with. And on Sundays, you got to ride in it. And it didn't have an air conditioning unit. You rode with the windows down. You can't find a car today without an air conditioner. It's hard. Back then, it was common. Today, 94% of the air we breathe is indoor air. 94%. We live in an air-conditioned house where the HVAC system, heating, ventilation, air conditioning system, is centralized. And we get into our air-conditioned car, which we park in the driveway as close to the door as we can, or in the garage, and drive to work or drive to the store we're going to, and we try to park as close as we can to that front door. And we'll go around the parking lot 10 times looking for that spot that's close to the front door. And then we go in and it's two sets of doors. Why? Because it's that same air recirculating, whether it's a grocery store, a shopping center, a building, such as this one. So part of that came about in the 70s, for those of you who are old enough to remember, when there was an oil embargo and there were long lines to get gasoline. And we decided that we were going to become energy efficient and not depend on foreign oil. That was a joke. What we did was essentially said that if you want any federal money to build a building such as this one, a library, public libraries, public schools, courthouses, etc., you had to build it energy efficient, which means you had to have that same air recirculating over and over. But people put new carpeting in buildings every so often, and they paint the walls, or they put, I don't know, they shine the floors, they squirt for bugs, etc. The other thing that happens in buildings is they sometimes leak, or structures, I should say. So what happens when you have something where there's a water intrusion? Water intrusion is kind of the catchword, if you wish, in this field. You have water come in and it pools somewhere. It could be from around a window and you may not see it. It could be a roof leak. Mold spores start to revive. And when they revive, they multiply. And when they multiply, they release spores. And those spores carry on them mycotoxins. And mycotoxins affect us. And there's also bacteria that starts growing. Gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria that release endotoxins. And then you get this mixture, say it's between the walls somewhere, and it grows through drywall, and once it gets through that drywall, say it's in a home or in a nice office and you've got wallpaper, well, first it goes through that drywall, then it hits glue. Okay, the glue or paint. And it combines with that chemically. And it produces what are called VOCs, volatile organic compounds. And these organic compounds are in and of themselves toxic. So, you have bacteria and molds, endotoxins and mycotoxins, and VOCs. And you're breathing this 93% of the time, 94% of the time, because it's indoor air. Now, can it have an effect on you? You bet. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, why now? Why has this problem cropped up now? Well, I have two answers for you. Three. First, we didn't use drywall like we do today. We used plaster. Remember that? And nothing grows on plaster. It's very alkaline. So it wasn't such a problem. Secondly, it's been known since, 1200 BC? Moses took 40 years to do a 10-day trip as he wandered through the desert. Leviticus chapter 14. If there's a growth on the wall of a home, have the rabbi come by and mark that line where it stops growing and have all the inhabitants leave, and the rabbi comes back 1 week later, and if that growth has passed the line that the rabbi marked, that house and everything in it has to be destroyed. Leviticus. Now, where was Moses when he wrote this? In the desert. He wasn't in some swamp. He was in the desert. There's not a lot of water. Remember, you had to hit the rock, get water. Do anybody read the Bible anymore? You're probably wondering how many animals he put on the ark. The third thing is, when I wanted to look up something 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, when I was growing up, whatever, I had to go to the library, but only when it was open. And I had to open one of those little drawers. Remember the little drawers you open? You had these little file cards that you had to go through and go through all this rigmarole. Now, I can get to anything I want sitting in my pajamas with a cup of coffee at 2 a.m. in the morning and Google it. And people are doing that. So the information is much more available than it was. Lastly, I'm going to show you that this information that I'm talking to you about, molds, mycotoxins, etc., has been around in medicine and science for 20, 30 years. I'm going to show it to you. It's not something new. It is not unknown factor. These are medical, peer-reviewed medical journals from all areas of medicine. There's about well over 100,000 species of mold. Mold grows everywhere and grows on anything. It'll grow on concrete. It'll grow on anything dry or wet. They're having a problem with it in the Middle East because it grows on jet fuel. The other thing is, when they start to grow, they multiply very fast. Think your bedroom. I'm assuming everybody's got a bedroom that's here. Okay. And you break open a bag of birdseed. You have a bird feeder, and you're going to put some bird seeds to attract the nice, pretty birds, and it broke in your bedroom, and there's seeds all over the floor. And Unfortunately, you've got to leave right then and go visit some relatives 3 hours away for the weekend. You've promised you'd be there. And these seeds sit there. Nothing's going to happen to them, right? Correct. Now, assume while you're gone that something in your bathroom leaks, and it comes in there, and that water sits there for 2-3 days with those seeds. Well, when you come back 2-3 days later, you're going to have little sprouts. That's the same way with mold spores. They sit and do nothing until you get them wet. Then they sprout, so to speak. They don't sprout, they sporulate. So when they sprout, they multiply very rapidly and release spores. So let me take you on a little bit of a journey here. I'd say 24 are the ones we're mainly worried about. These 24 are readily recognizable. They wear t-shirts with the arms rolled up. They've got tattoos on their neck. They've got rings in their nose and in their eyebrows and all kinds of mean, nasty places that you and I would not think of putting a ring. But they're all bad. Now, I get a lot of questions, well, isn't black mold dangerous? Folks, mold comes in every color you can think of. And none of them are good. Do you ask, a color on a cancer? Well, what color is this cancer? Because I know if it's this color, it's bad. No, they're all bad. No one wants cancer. Same way with molds. They have all kinds of colors. They're used in biological warfare. We used it in Southeast Asia, Vietnam conflict, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam. We flew 400 sorties, and it was called Yellow Rain. And it is estimated by the military that it caused 10,000 dead. And you can get on the National Guard website and look up trichothecene, which is a mycotoxin, and they will tell you how to protect your troops from it, or how to tell if your troops have been affected by it, etc. Saddam Hussein used it against the Iranians and the Kurds in the 1980s, and in the first Gulf War, sent a couple of Scud missiles over to Israel with some of these in the warhead. Here's the 24 to 48 hours that we talked about. So, as I've explained to you, it's kind of like this. Molds in and of themselves, if all you're getting are the spores, yes, you'll get a little bit of asthma, maybe, some sort of allergy type reaction. Mycotoxins are like a bullet with molds as the gun. Okay, because mycotoxins are much worse. Do you remember the old Superman movies? I've always wondered about this. Superman would stand there with his hands on his hips, and somebody would shoot him, some bad guy would shoot him in the chest, and the bullets would bounce off, and the bad guy would run out of bullets, and then he'd throw the gun at Superman, and he'd duck. Why would he duck? All right. Some of the names. Trichothecenes is very famous. Beta-glucans, T2 toxins, aflatoxin. Let's talk a minute about aflatoxin, which comes mostly from aspergillus. And by the way, folks, one mold does not equal one mycotoxin. One mold can produce, and does, a whole series of mycotoxins. The most toxic substance known to humankind is aflatoxin B2. Did you get that? The most toxic substance we know of. Worse than nerve gas. Worse than whatever you want. The worst of them all. The big mama. Or whoever you want to call it. The baddest of the bad is aflatoxin. Because it kills. Okay, and this is not my invention. The government comes out with this, a list every year of things that they consider toxic or carcinogenic or potentially carcinogenic or perhaps carcinogenic. And this is number one, numero uno. What does it cause in humans? So you're living in this house or you're going to work and unbeknownst to you, there's a leak somewhere and spores, mycotoxins, etc. And then what happens is these then start spreading. So what does it do to humans? When we humans, okay, let me back up. Everyone has an immune system. Everyone's immune system is unique and different, like a fingerprint. And everyone's immune system has, if you want to boil it down, one job. And that job is to tell self from non-self, what is normally of the body and what is foreign to the body. And its job is to tell what's good and what's bad. So, what the immune system does is protects us. It's our barrier against a zillion viruses and bacteria and parasites and all kinds of stuff. The first things that mycotoxins like to do is damage seriously and severely the immune system. Why? Because if they've knocked the walls down, then they can get in. So that's what our immune system is there for. And that's the first thing that mycotoxins affect. So when you have a suppressed immune system, what does that mean to people? Well, it means you're more susceptible to diseases, you get sicker more often, you catch everything, it takes you a lot longer to get over it. You're the first one on the block to get the flu and the last one to get over it. A cut or a scratch takes a way too long time to heal. Your immune system isn't functioning, it's suppressed. Then what happens is when this continues for a while, the immune system is fighting it off, fighting it off, fighting it off, fighting it off, and then it kind of goes haywire. What we call an immune dysregulation. It goes haywire. Some parts of the immune system underreact, some others overreact. And the underreaction is, again, the getting sick and things taking a long time to heal and catching everything. The second one is you become overly sensitive. Things that you used to be able to wear, like ladies, if there was a certain perfume they wore, now they can't wear it. You can't go down certain aisles at the grocery store because that odor, it just makes you, you can't go by Dillard's perfume section on your way into the store because it makes you ill. If you used to have a beer or a glass of wine or a margarita or whatever, now you can't anymore. It affects you. That's the overly sensitive, overly reacting. Thirdly, you start developing an autoimmune reaction. What's an autoimmune reaction versus an autoimmune disease? Huge difference. Huge difference. What that is where your own immune system starts fighting everything, including yourself. You're building antibodies to yourself. You're fighting yourself. Well, the problem with that is that you go to a doctor and he runs the autoimmune test. What are autoimmune diseases? Lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, scleroderma, etc. And lo and behold, 2 or 3 of them are light up. So then, as a lot of doctors will do, they'll put you on steroids. What's a steroid? It's an immune suppressant. So your suppressed immune system gets really suppressed now. But interestingly, if you get off these steroids, the same symptoms are still there. So it's not really treating anything, it's just sweeping it under the carpet, so to speak. It's always there. It's just suppressed until you quit taking the steroids. And steroids can cause diabetes, cataracts, osteoporosis, a whole host of diseases. There are some, for instance, there's a heart pill that's well known to cause lupus in about 20% of the people who take it. Now, do you treat the lupus? Or do you take that heart pill away and swap it out for a different one? Well, you just swap it out for a different one. That's all. Simple. You don't assume that it's an autoimmune disease. You've got to find out what caused the problem first. Okay, so when your immune system is affected, what's the first thing you feel? Fatigue. An overwhelming tiredness. You win the lottery, you're too tired to go pick up your money. And if you send your mama to get the money for you, and she says, let's go to Hawaii, you say, let's wait till next week. I'm too tired this week. Maybe I'll feel better next week. And you start reasoning with yourself. You know, I haven't been eating right. I've been worrying about the kids. I need a vacation. I haven't had a vacation in a long time. I'm getting older. Maybe it's my thyroid. Maybe I have hypoglycemia. Maybe I have that fibromyalgia. Maybe I have that chronic fatigue syndrome, and about 80% of our patients come in having at one time or another been diagnosed by some physician as having chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, or hypoglycemia. And they leave with none of those diagnoses. But you're too tired. You're too fatigued. You don't want to do anything. The things that used to bring you great pleasure, you're too tired to do. You go to bed and sleep 8, 10 hours, or 6 hours, however long you're normal sleeping, and you wake up just as tired as when you went to bed. It's an overwhelming fatigue. That's one of the first symptoms that we have. And these are the areas that molds and mycotoxins, VOCs, affect. It's almost as if it's a pattern, a waterfall effect. Starts with the immune system, goes to the nervous system, respiratory system, and skin. And let me tell you about the nervous system. I don't mean you get nervous, but you do get somewhat depressed. Well, I'm going to get depressed if I don't have any joy in life. And it's been going on for months and months and months, and maybe a year or 2 year or 3 year, and I'm going to see doctor after doctor after doctor who end up telling you it's in your head. And I'm having no fun in life. I don't have any more pleasures. Well, if you're not depressed, there's something wrong with you. So it affects the nervous system, but it also causes a demyelinating type of disorder. These are studies have shown this. And so it gives you MS-like symptoms. And those are, you have numbness, tingling, muscle weakness. You have strange new headaches. You didn't have headaches like this before. Everybody's had a headache, but these are different. A different intensity, they're a different length. They come much more frequently. They're much more severe. So they affect the nervous system. Memory loss is a common thing. You can't remember anything. These folks live with sticky notes everywhere. I can tell you that a lot of people also have confusion. They get lost easily, going to the same place. The phone number of somebody they've called 1,000 times before all of a sudden now they can't remember that number. They get lost in words. They stop in the middle of a sentence because they can't find the right word that they know what they want to say, they just can't get it out. These are some of the things, and we're going to show you some photographs too as we go along. Now, here are some of the molds and the mycotoxins produced by some of these. We talked about aspergillus and fusarium. Anybody here wearing contacts? Okay, you remember the contact thing where everybody was getting infections? They couldn't figure it out. Well, it turns out that a study, and I'll show it to you, it was fusarium. It was a mold. It wasn't a bacteria. It was a mold in the liquid that you're supposed to clean it in. So here's your friend fusarium. And these two, this one is a mycotoxin that's highly estrogenic. It mimics estrogen. There's an elementary school in the state of Oklahoma in a little town. And there's not a lot of kids or teachers because it's a little town. There's 5 female elementary school teachers in this and 2 male. And out of the 5 females, 4 of them had hysterectomies within 2 years. The other thing is, the kids got sick. And one of the kids, a 6-year-old little girl, was brought to me and several of the other children. And this little girl had brothers and sisters, older and younger, but she was fully developed in her pubic area like an adult female. Hair and everything. And she had already had 2 menstrual periods. 6. Okay? Penicillium is a tremorgenic mycotoxin, which means it causes tremors. So I had a doctor come see me. By the way, I treat an enormous amount of physicians and dentists and nurses and things like that. Well, this doctor is an interventional radiologist. Well, an interventional radiologist is a specialist in radiology who inserts needles into like a certain spot, say in the liver, to inject some sort of medicine into that little spot, or does all these really fine things. And he comes to see me and he says, I can't do my job. And I said, why? He says, because my hands shake. Can't stick those little needles in people. He, typically of radiologists, they'll sit in a room and have all their films and then stick them up on these white things to look at them and dictate. And he was dictating, and somebody knocks at the door there and says, can I come in? I'm going through this little half door behind you, because this little half door behind you is where we have some of the equipment, and I'm here to check it, make sure everything's functioning. It's the annual technician checkup, whatever you want to call it. So he goes back there and comes right back out, and he says, I don't know what's happened, but there's been a big leak in there, and there's stuff growing all over the floor and walls behind there. Well, it turned out to be penicillium mold, and penicillium mold is tremorgenic, so he made arrangements not to be there anymore, and the hospital cleaned it up, and I treated him, and he's back to sticking his needles into people. Do you know the story about penicillium mold? Say no, so I can tell my story. No. Thank you. William Fleming in Scotland put 2 petri dishes, you know, these little flat dishes, and left them uncovered for a weekend. One had penicillium mold, and the other had a bacteria. When he came back on Monday, he realized he had left them uncovered, but he noticed that the penicillium mold was fine, but the bacteria had stopped growing and was dead. So he said something from this penicillium mold affected this bacteria and killed it. And it, sure enough, it did. And he developed what is known as penicillin. And a lot of our antibiotics today that we've used for the past 50 years are derived from mycotoxins. When someone goes to the hospital for a bone marrow transplant, you give him a medication that suppresses the immune system so he doesn't reject it. That medication is a derivative of a mycotoxin. So, have you ever pulled out from your refrigerator, you know, that plastic, that bread in the plastic, you know, it's the heel, and it's been left in there for longer than you'd like to remember, and you look at it and it's got green fuzzies and black spots and yellow things and whatnot. Those are bacteria and molds feeding on that slice of bread. Molds release mycotoxins to kill off the bacteria so it gets to have the slice of bread for itself and doesn't have to share it. That is the principle behind mycotoxins, why they're produced. They're survival of the fittest kind of thing. Now, Stachybotrys and trichothecene. You're going to hear a little more about trichothecene in about half a minute. But Stachybotrys was shown by Dr. Strauss of Texas Tech University. He did a study on Stachybotrys, and the thing that people have said all the time, well, you can't measure mycotoxins, number one. Second, mycotoxins aren't produced right away. And his study showed, A, it produces trichothecenes immediately, and second, he has a method for measuring the trichothecene in the room. And he did a very beautiful study on that. Okay, how bad are they? Well, they're known to cause kidney cancer, esophageal cancer, leukemia, cancer of the liver with a 10-year latency period, testicular cancer, and also prostate cancer, but only in men. Okay. Is that too hard for you to read? Can you all read that? Yes or no? Okay, thank you. That's pretty simple. Straightforward, pretty plain. Journal of Family Practice, look at the year. 20 years ago. British Medical Journal, 20 years ago. American Journal of Respiratory Disease, 1989. All saying this. Is this new? Has it been in various journals? Has it been around for at least 20 years? Yes. British Medical Journal. All in that same general 5-year period. Okay, let's look at this. Spores of toxigenic fungi contain mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are going to be absorbed by respiratory epithelium and translocated to other sites, producing systemic effects. What systemic effects means in medicine is in other organs, in other tissues. Look at the years. I mean, these are all peer-reviewed and respected journals, but this is 20 years ago. And you go to a doctor today and he still hasn't figured it out. Look at Stachybotrys. Produce a range of highly toxic macrolytic trichothecenes 20 years ago. The effects of these toxins range from extreme irritation and necrosis of skin. I'm going to show you necrosis of skin in a minute. That means death of skin. And mucous membranes to hemorrhage, exhaustion of bone marrow, and immunosuppression, which we've talked about. I know Bill Croft. He's a nice guy. Do you know what happened to him 2 years ago? Federal government came by knocking on his door because somebody complained about what he's doing. A particular group that we all give money to every month if we drive a car, if we have a home, if we have we work. You know what I'm talking about? Do I have to say it? Hello? Very good. You're starting to learn. I like that. And cost him a small fortune to prove that my lab is fine. And he's been doing this for how long? But they don't like it that they're proving. They want to prove that everything about this is just hogwash, that you can put molds on a slice of bread and have it for breakfast. And the reason I'm showing you actual studies and quotes from studies is because I was told by Ms. Harris that doctors have told her these things can't cause that. Baloney. We've known that for almost 30 years. Now, we have the CDC just down I-20, a few hours from here. If you look up mold in their little search box, it'll tell you that molds, well, you know, they can cause some problems. They can give you some allergies and some respiratory irritation, and you shouldn't really mess with it, you know, and there's a lot of controversy about it, but we're not sure. Now, trichothecene comes from mold. It doesn't come from anything else. It's a direct mycotoxin. So you look up the word trichothecene in the search box, and this is what you get. Trichothecene mycotoxins may be weaponized. Okay? Dermal exposure leads to burning pain. Oral exposure, vomiting and diarrhea. Ocular exposure, blurred vision. Inhalation, nasal irritation and cough. And systemic symptoms can develop with all routes of exposure, meaning whether you inhaled it, it got on your skin, or you swallowed it, you're going to include weakness, ataxia, low blood pressure, coagulation defects, meaning you bleed, and death. I think that's pretty final. It can kill you. And they go on to tell you how terrible these things are. How can they say on one part of their website that it's just a little problem, and the next, on the same people are saying it causes death? It can cause death. All right. But that's the federal government for you. My worst nightmare is I am awakened and told, and if somebody's knocking on my door and I open the door and there's somebody standing there saying, "Hi, I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help you." God bless. This is the government of Canada, Canadian Human Rights Commission. It came out this summer. Okay, and it talks to you about the mold and all that it causes, etc. And what it's increasingly recognized as serious contaminants, okay, cause neurological and psychological disorders, including depression, okay, inflammatory responses, asthma, allergies, and environmental sensitivity, damage to the nervous system, and peripheral neuropathy and neurophysiologic abnormalities. And you know where they got some of this data from? The studies we did at our center. This is straight out of the federal government, and here's Dr. Strauss. So these are things that other countries are paying attention to. And here's some of those symptoms that I've mentioned to you. You can read. I don't need to read these out to you. You went to school. Actually, pets can get sick too. This is Environmental Health Perspectives. This is a journal that's published by the National Institutes of Health, NIH, monthly. When you subscribe, you get a big envelope that says yellow envelope that says U.S. government, printing office. So what I wanted to show you is this date, August, and by the way, you can read it, because after a certain time, you don't have to, it's available to the whole public, because this is a publicly funded government, federal government funded organization. But keywords, satrotoxin, stachybotrys, streptococcine, etc. Okay? Well, conclusion, they're talking about how this can cause, in this study, this is just an objective, a little paragraph they put in the beginning. Now let's look at the month before. This is satrotoxin G from the black mold stachybotrys. Okay? You don't have to read all this, but look at this. These findings suggest that neurotoxicity, which means brain, spinal cord, and nerves, and inflammation within the nose and brain are potential adverse health effects of exposure to satrotoxin and stachybotrys in the indoor air of water-damaged buildings. Why does the CDC says it just irritates the respiratory system, but the National Institutes of Health says this? Online, February 06, published July 06. The other one was August. Again, I'm stressing how this is not new. This is 1992, Dr. Miller, atmospheric environment. Mixture of compounds produced by molds have considerable toxicological significance. And remember I mentioned VOCs? Over 500 VOCs have been described from fungi. The dominant VOC is ethanol. Itself is a potent synergizer of many toxins. You know what it means by synergizer? When you put them together, it's like, woo, really big. 40 investigations from many different countries demonstrated an association between living in damp homes or homes with mold growth and adverse respiratory symptoms in children. What are the symptoms? Fatigue, headache, symptoms from the central nervous system. The problem is there's a lot of schools with this problem of mold. And what happens, a child's immune system develops from birth to adolescence and requires a natural stimulation. Okay? And any disturbance of this normal maturing process may increase the risk for abnormal reactions. Symptoms reported, blah, blah, blah. Look at this. Nosebleed and hemoptysis, coughing up blood. Okay? That's not irritation. When a kid coughs up blood, is that irritation? Now, here's this underlying sentence that I want you to pay attention to. This inflammation, and they mean of the respiratory tree, can be induced by the well-recognized allergic IgE-mediated mechanism, but also by non-allergic mechanism induced by toxic agents. And the allergists refused to see this other but also. From here, they quit here. Everything is an allergy. Identification is important because some are known to produce potent mycotoxins. Extensive mold growth, especially toxigenic mold growth, also requires that the remedial workers be protected. But look at who did this. Ruth Etzel and Rylander. Rylander is from Sweden. Ruth Etzel works for the government here. Guess where she was transferred to after this article? Alaska. Then they tell you what? And this is the United States EPA. And this was in the year 2000, 7 years ago. So anyone who says there are no government guidelines, you can tell them to go suck a large egg, ostrich preferably. Do not touch it, or anything that looks like it with your bare hands. Do not get mold or mold spores in your eyes. Do not breathe these things. Consult personal protective equipment and containment guidelines. What they're saying here is wear, the whole suits and everything else before you touch it or inhale it. Don't get near it. And lastly, minimum is an N95 respirator, gloves, and eye protection. And how many of you saw pictures of volunteer groups going to New Orleans with nothing but flip-flops, shorts, t-shirt, and sometimes one of those little flimsy paper masks? Now, in 2006, senior advisor to the EPA was at a conference in Minneapolis and was interviewed by the editor of the Minneapolis newspaper. And they were talking about Katrina and New Orleans and everything that had happened in Rita as well, etc. What this gentleman, the senior advisor, told the editor, and this is public knowledge, it was printed in their paper and you can look it up. He was saying that the United States government removed, the federal government removed the normal OSHA requirements for the cleanup of New Orleans because it would cost too much doing it the right way. And they had to divert some of that money to a war somewhere else, and in Iraq. So they didn't want to spend quite that much money in taking care of New Orleans. The other thing they said, he said, the editor asked him, well, what about all our church groups and college volunteers during spring break and all these people who go down there and they're around this stuff all the time? This senior advisor said, expect a lot of cancers in 10 to 15 years. When you inhale these things for several months in a building or in a home and you move away, it makes you maybe 10, 15%, 20% better, but the damage doesn't go away. You've got to repair what's been damaged. So unless you do that repair, this goes on, and you've seen the latency periods. 10, 15 years is not unusual. So unless it's treated, and we see a lot of folks who said this happened to me in 1999 and 2002, etc. How could it be? Well, if you're exposed to a high dose of radiation today, you're going to still be feeling the effects of that high dose of radiation 10 years from now. Let me bring up one more point and then I'm okay? In 1998, Dr. Ponikow and his group presented an article at the annual meeting of the ear, nose, and throat surgeons and published it in the Proceedings of the Mayo Clinic. What he did was he wanted to find out what is the most common cause of chronic rhinosinusitis. What does that mean? Chronic, runny, stuffy nose. The crud, the cold, the yuck, the okay? So he and his group went up with their strange instruments that they have and up into the sinuses and pulled out gunk that I don't like to look at. They love that stuff. And looked at it to find out what is the most common cause of yuck. Okay? Is it virus? If so, what kind of virus? Is it a bacteria? If so, what kind of bacteria are we talking about? Well, when he did this, what do you think he found? What? Fungus. What percent do you think he found was fungus? 96.8. 213 patients, 203 was fungus, not a bacteria, not a virus. But this was in 99, and since then he's come out with several more studies reinforcing that. But guess what? If you and I go to a doctor today, internist, ENT, family doctor, whatever, and we say we've got the crud, we've got the common runny, gunky nose thing, we're going to get an antibiotic and a decongestant. Yeah, and you'll feel better, it'll go away, but then a few weeks later it's back again. Now, why the hell did I read that study back almost 10 years ago, and it seems to me that nobody else in the world has read that friggin' study? Well, excuse me, it doesn't take that long. It's online, it's free. As long as you're a licensed MD, the Mayo Clinic will mail it to you free. Why not read the darn thing? Folks, I appreciate you listening to me and my stories. I appreciate you inviting me down here, and God bless you all.